My name is Michael. I'm 35 years old, and this is how I took revenge on the family who called me the black sheep my entire life. The air was thick with barbecue smoke and the sound of clinking glasses when I stepped onto the grass of the old family farm for the first time in years. The chatter and laughter died instantly, like someone had pressed pause. Dozens of eyes turned toward me, some wide with surprise, others narrowed with barely disguised disdain. For a moment, you could have heard a pin drop. Then my cousin, the same one who used to lock me out of the treehouse when we were kids, leaned toward another relative and whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. Well, look who crawled back. The black sheep himself. The words hung in the air, followed by a burst of laughter that rippled across the crowd. My aunts shook their heads with smirks, my uncles clinked bottles and chuckled, and even the kids stared at me like I was some unwelcome guest crashing their party. I felt the old sting, the familiar burn of being the outsider in the family I'd been born into but never truly belonged to. But this time I didn't flinch. I didn't hang my head or force an awkward laugh. Instead, I stood there, calm, steady, letting their ridicule wash over me, because what they didn't know was that every table, every chair, every blade of grass under their feet, it all belonged to me now. They were drinking beer and gossiping on land I owned, celebrating under the very roof of the farmhouse they'd spent decades telling me I'd never be welcome in. And before this reunion was over, they were going to find out the truth. I glanced, around, my eyes lingering on the old barn that had been in our family for generations. That barn had been the heart of the farm, the symbol of everything I was told I could never touch. I remembered the countless times I'd been pushed away, told I wasn't worthy of being part of the real family legacy. But standing there, I knew the tables had turned. I forced a small smile, feeling the weight of the secret I carried. They thought I was still the failure, the disappointment, the black sheep. But the truth was, the black sheep had come home, and he owned the pasture. They had no idea. I thought, steadying myself as I stepped further into the crowd. No idea that today everything they believed about me was about to shatter. But before I tell you how I got here, how I turned years of humiliation into the sweetest revenge, I need to start at the beginning with the painful story that led me to this moment. Would you like me to continue with *** Michael's backstory? And presents set up 700 to 900 words *** next. I was born into a proud farming family in rural Ohio, where the land wasn't just dirt, it was legacy. My father, a man of calloused hands and iron expectations, believed the measure of a man was how well he could work the fields from sunup to sundown. My older brother, David, fit that mold perfectly. He was strong, obedient, the kind of son who could drive a tractor before he could drive a car. To my father, David was the golden child, the future of the farm, and me. I was the disappointment, the one who never measured up. The nickname Black Sheep started early, whispered at first by uncles with smirks, and then repeated openly at the dinner table. I wasn't like the rest of them. While David was eager to mend fences and haul hay, I spent my free time with my nose in a book or strumming on a second-hand guitar I'd saved up for. I dreamed of college, of a life bigger than the fences that lined our property, but to my family, that wasn't ambition. It was betrayal. Farms, not for quitters, Michael. My father would bark whenever I mentioned my plans. Don't get above your raising. My mother tried, in her quiet way, to soften the blows. She'd squeeze my hand under the table when my father's words cut too deep, or slip me extra pie after a long day. but she rarely stood up for me outright. It was as if she believed her silence could keep the peace, even as I crumbled under the weight of never being enough. Family gatherings were the worst. Around the long wooden table, David's stories of the harvest or fixing the old combine were met with nods of respect and hearty laughs. When I tried to share about a book I loved or a paper I'd aced, I was met with rolled eyes or mocking jokes. "Here he goes again," my cousins would snicker. Professor Michael with his big words. And every time I'd force a smile while my insides twisted, wishing just once someone would take me seriously. By the time I graduated high school, I knew there was no future for me on that farm, not one where I could ever be more than the black sheep, so I left. I packed a duffel bag with a few clothes and the guitar I loved, and I walked away from the only life I'd ever known. My father didn't say goodbye. David barely looked up from his plate. My mother hugged me so tight I could barely breathe, whispering, "Write when you can." But even that felt like a goodbye heavy with guilt. The years that followed weren't easy. I worked odd jobs, scraped by on scholarships, and studied harder than I thought possible. Slowly, I built a life. Today, I work in finance in the city. I have a steady income, a decent apartment, and a circle of colleagues who respect me for what I bring to the table, things I once thought were out of reach. On paper, I've made it, but the scars remain. Every success still carries the echo of my father's voice, the laughter of my cousins, the sting of being told I'd never measure up. I haven't spoken much to my family in years. Holidays pass without phone calls. Birthdays come and go without acknowledgement. And yet, the farm, my grandfather's pride and joy, is still the thread that ties them all together. Every family conversation, every gathering, circles back to it. That land has always been their crown jewel, the symbol of who we were supposed to be. The place they told me I had no part in. What they don't know, what none of them could have imagined, is that life has a funny way of turning tables, and the farm they used to wave in my face as proof I didn't belong. It's mine now. But to understand how, you have to hear the rest of the story. Do you want me to move into part 3, the inciting incident where Michael learns of the opportunity that changes everything? The call came on a grey morning, the kind where the sky feels too heavy to look at. My mother's voice was soft but steady on the other end. "Michael, your father passed last night." For a moment, I just sat there in silence, staring at the city skyline outside my apartment window. We hadn't spoken in years, and yet hearing the words still hit like a punch to the chest. Not because I mourned the man who had spent most of my life tearing me down, but because I knew what came next. I'd have to go back to the farm, back to the people who had branded me the black sheep. The funeral was as tense as I'd feared. The church pews were packed with relatives in dark suits and stiff dresses, their eyes flicking toward me like I was a stranger who'd wandered in by mistake. Whispers floated around me, half hidden behind in books. I caught the words asterisk surprised. He even showed up asterisk more than once. I kept my face calm, my hands folded, but inside I felt like a boy again, standing on the outside of a circle that had never let me in. The reading of the will was worse. We gathered in the lawyer's office, the air thick with expectation. My brother David sat tall in his chair, smug before the words were even spoken, and when they were, it was exactly what I'd expected. The farm, the land, the legacy, all of it left to him. Not a cent, not a scrap of soil for me. My father's final judgment was as clear as his living one. I didn't belong. As the lawyer closed the folder, One of my aunts let out a little laugh and said, "Well, of course. Michael was never cut out for this life." The others nodded, as if the will had merely confirmed what they'd always known. I felt the heat rise in my chest, my hands clenching under the table, but I said nothing. I kept my head down, my jaw tight, swallowing the humiliation like I had 1,000 times before. That evening, we all gathered back at the farmhouse for dinner. The long table groaned under the weight of casseroles and roast meats, the same table where I'd once been mocked for dreaming of a life beyond the farm. I sat at the far end, listening to the laughter and chatter that seemed to fill every space but mine. And then David leaned back in his chair, smirked down the table, and said, "Guess you'll always be the black sheep, huh, Mike?" The table erupted in laughter. I forced myself to stay still, to keep my face neutral, but inside, the rage boiled hot enough to choke me. They didn't just think I was a failure. They believed I always would be. They didn't expect me to succeed. They expected me to disappear that night. Long after the dishes were cleared and the house had gone quiet, I overheard a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. David was on the phone in the study, his voice low but sharp. "I can't make another payment right now. The farm's not bringing in enough. I told you, I just need more time." My chest tightened as I listened, the pieces falling into place. He was drowning in debt. The farm, the crown jewel of our family, had a lien on it. I leaned back against the hallway wall, the ghost of a smile tugging at my lips. Maybe my father hadn't left me the farm. Maybe the will had shut me out completely, but this wasn't over. If David thought he'd won, he was wrong, because maybe I couldn't inherit the farm, but I could take it. Do you want me to continue with part 4, rising tension, emotional conflict, where Michael quietly starts planning how to turn David's debt into his opportunity? Back in the city, I couldn't shake what I'd overheard that night. I told myself to let it go, that I'd built a life far away from their small-town cruelty, that I didn't need to get dragged back into their world. But every time I closed my eyes, I heard David's smug laugh at the dinner table. I saw my aunt's smirk in the lawyer's office. I felt the sting of that word again. Black sheep. No matter how much I'd grown, no matter how far I'd come, their voices still lived inside me. And now I had a chance to silence them. I started digging. First the county property records, then the bank's foreclosure notices. It didn't take long to confirm what I already suspected. The farm was in serious financial trouble. David had missed multiple payments on the loan. The numbers were ugly and getting worse. If something didn't change soon, the bank was going to step in and take the land my family worshipped like scripture. The logical part of me whispered to walk away. Let the farm rot. Let the legacy they prized so much crumble into dust. But the other part, the part that remembered every Christmas I spent sitting at the end of the table, ignored. Every birthday they forgot. Every time my father called me. The mistake child when he thought I couldn't hear. That part refused to let go. This wasn't about land. It was about justice. About showing them I wasn't the weak, unwanted son they believed I was. So I made a decision. I wouldn't just watch David lose the farm. I would take it, and I'd do it in a way none of them would see coming. I reached out to the bank discreetly, never using my own name. Instead, I set up a limited liability company, a shell with no obvious ties to me. Through it, I began negotiating to buy out the debt, knowing the bank was desperate to unload a property that was bleeding money. They were eager, almost too eager, and within weeks, I was deep in discussions that would put me in control of the very land they had sworn I'd never touch. While all this was happening behind the scenes, life kept pulling me back into their orbit. A cousin's wedding was the next unavoidable event, and though I considered skipping it, something in me wanted to go. I wanted to see their faces, to feel their arrogance, because it fueled the fire that kept me pushing forward. The reception was exactly what I expected. As I stood near the bar nursing a drink, one of my uncles clapped me on the back and laughed. "City life made you soft, huh?" I forced a polite smile, ignoring the snickers that followed. Later, David found me by the buffet, holding a plate piled high with food. He smirked, leaning close enough that I could smell the whiskey on his breath. "Don't worry, Mike," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "We'll keep the farm and the family without you." I met his eyes, steady and calm, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I smiled, a slow, quiet smile that he couldn't begin to understand. "You'll see soon enough," I thought. That night, as the music played and laughter rang out around me, I felt something shift inside. I wasn't the hurt boy sitting alone anymore. I wasn't the mistake child begging for scraps of approval. I was a man with a plan, with the power to turn years of humiliation into the sweetest kind of justice. Every insult, every laugh at my expense, every time they had reminded me I didn't belong, all of it was leading here, to this moment, to this transformation. They still saw the black sheep, but soon they would see the wolf. Do you want me to move on to *** part 5, the climax? Twist ***, where Michael finally reveals to the family that the farm is his. A month later, the paperwork was signed, the ink still fresh on the deed that now bore my name. After weeks of tense negotiations with the bank, the farm, the land my family had spent generations protecting and hoarding, legally belonged to me. I sat in my apartment the night it became official, staring at the documents spread out on my kitchen table. The satisfaction was quiet, steady, like the calm after a long storm. They had called me the black sheep my entire life. Now, without them even realizing it, the black sheep owned their crown jewel. The timing couldn't have been better. The annual family reunion was scheduled just weeks later, as it always was, right there on the farm. I hadn't planned to attend, but the thought of showing up, of walking into the place they had banished me from and revealing the truth, was too tempting to resist, so I went. When I pulled up, the laughter and music spilling from the farmhouse windows cut off as soon as I stepped through the door. Conversations froze, heads turned, and then, like clockwork, the first snicker broke the silence. "Well, if it isn't the black sheep," my cousin muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Laughter followed, just like it always had. I didn't flinch. I just smiled, calm and collected, and took a seat at the long table where I had once sat ignored and humiliated. They didn't know it yet, but everything had changed. The meal dragged on, their jokes sharper than the clinking of silverware, their laughter louder than the music in the background. I let it all wash over me, waiting. And when the plates were full and the room had settled into a rhythm, I stood slowly, raising my glass. "I'd like to make a toast," I said, my voice steady enough to cut through the chatter. Heads turned, the room falling quiet in curiosity. "To family," I began, scanning the faces of the people who had made me feel like an outsider my entire life. "And to new beginnings. Because, as of last week, this farm belongs to me." For a moment, silence crashed over the room like a wave. Forks clattered against plates. My aunt's hand froze halfway to her mouth, and across the table, David's face drained of color, his jaw tightening as he realized exactly what I'd just said. I reached into the folder I'd brought and laid the foreclosure documents on the table, the deed stacked neatly on top. The bank was ready to foreclose, I said evenly. David couldn't keep up with the payments, so I stepped in. My eyes lingered on my brother's as I added, "The farm is mine now." The weight of the words hung heavy in the air. David tried to sputter something, an excuse maybe, or a denial, but the documents in front of him left no room for argument. My cousins stared, mouths open. My uncles shifted uncomfortably in their seats. And my aunts, the ones who had laughed the loudest at my expense, couldn't seem to meet my eyes. But I didn't gloat. Not yet. Instead, I set my glass down and said, "Don't worry. I'm not here to throw anyone out. You're welcome to keep gathering here, to keep calling it home. But there's one condition. From now on, you respect me. Because this land, this house, this legacy, it's mine now." The silence was suffocating, the power shift undeniable. For the first time in my life, they weren't laughing, they weren't mocking, they were listening. I let the moment sink in, then leaned back slightly and added with a small, deliberate smile, "Funny thing about being the black sheep. Sometimes we're just wolves in disguise." Would you like me to continue with part 6? Resolution, Empowerment Arc, showing how Michael's life and his relationship to the family changes after this reveal. In the weeks that followed the reunion, the ripple effects of my announcement spread through the family like wildfire. David avoided me entirely, too humiliated to face me after watching the farm slip from his grip. The man who had once smirked at every insult thrown my way now couldn't even look me in the eye. Some of my other relatives, the same ones who had mocked me for years, suddenly found reasons to call, their voices syrupy with false warmth. "How are you settling in, Michael? If you ever need help around the farm," they'd trail off, hoping to position themselves close enough to benefit. But I didn't forget the decades of laughter at my expense, the cold shoulders, the whispered jabs. This time, I set boundaries. No more insults, no more belittling. If they wanted to be part of my life, it would be on my terms, with respect as the price of admission, instead of leaning on them. I hired local workers to help me restore the farm, men and women David had turned away or underpaid, people who deserved a chance. Together, we repaired the barn, fixed fences, and brought the fields back to life. For the first time, the land felt alive, not just with crops, but with purpose. I found myself walking the fields at dusk, the air golden and still, realizing this place that had once symbolized my exclusion was now my greatest triumph. There were quiet moments when the old pain tried to creep back in, the memories of Christmas dinners spent at the far end of the table, birthdays forgotten, the sting of being called the mistake child. But each time I'd look at the farm, at the workers, smiling as they rebuilt something lasting, and I felt a steady calm. Revenge hadn't erased the years of pain. Nothing could, but it had given me something I'd never had before. Respect. Not just from them, though that mattered more than I liked to admit, but from myself. I was no longer the boy desperate for approval. I was the man who had taken the land they swore I'd never touch, and turned it into a victory they couldn't ignore. The black sheep had claimed the legacy, and finally, it was mine. Do you want me to write part 7? Final moment, emotional close, next, with Michael addressing the audience directly. My family called me the black sheep, and maybe I was. But the black sheep is still part of the flock, and sometimes he's the one leading it. I used to think their approval was the only thing that could make me whole, that without their acceptance I'd always be the outsider. But standing on the porch one evening, watching the sun dip low over the fields they swore I'd never deserve, I realized I didn't need their permission to belong. The land stretched wide and golden before me, mine in every sense, not just because of the deed in my name, but because I had earned it on my own terms. All the laughter, the insults, the years of being pushed aside had brought me here to this moment of quiet victory. They called me the black sheep, so I bought the farm, and I've never felt more at home.